Hey, everyone. So Frederick Buechner, that great Christian writer, once wrote that your purpose in life, your vocation, is at that place where your great love meets the world's great needs. And what I love about the Quaker religion movement is that is a place where we can find that great love, that great purpose in our life, that great desire that we have to make a difference, and the world's great needs. One Sunday, it must be about 10 years or so ago, I was determined to learn more about silence. And we've been talking about silence these last few weeks. Sitting in silence, breathing in silence, in and out. I'd begun practicing it with a format that my friend Dave Player actually gave me from that great Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, where you go through a format of breathing. In your mind, it's breathe in, breathe out for 5 minutes, in, out, and then deep, and then slow, and then deep, and then slow, and then calm, and then ease, calm, and then ease, and then smile, and then release, and smile, and release, and the present moment, beautiful present moment, the present moment, the beautiful present moment. And I'd been doing that for a while. He taught it to me before I took a trip to Italy. But then I heard about a Quaker meeting, and I heard about the Quakers, and they had a service here in town, and I think it was up at the Cabin building. You know where the Cabin, they used to call it the Log Cabin, but it's the Cabin Literary Center. It used to be there. Anyway, upstairs. And I went one Sunday morning, and they had a sit for 30 minutes, which is very short for them, but on business days, which is once a month, the Quakers have, at least this community had, 30 minutes one day and then an hour all the rest of the days. So of just being quiet. It's 30 minutes of just being quiet together. You're sitting around in a circle or a square. In this case, it was a circle, and it was a small group of people, maybe about that row of people sitting in a circle looking at each other, kind of breathing together. And it was an anxious 30 minutes for me because, after all, they knew each other well, and I didn't even know myself all that well. What do you do when your stomach starts gurgling, or worse, in a very small, tightly bunched group of totally silent people? But the experience was meaningful, and I knew I wanted to learn much more about quiet prayer, both by myself and with others. But for whatever reason, I never went back to another Quaker meeting. But since that time, I've learned so much from the Quaker authors. So Parker Palmer's one of them. And some of you may know Parker Palmer from his teaching and his great book, The Courage to Teach. And I actually ran into Parker Palmer around the year 2000. He and I were both speaking at a conference, and we happened to be on stage together. He was a great, famous person. So I didn't even meet him. I just happened to be on the stage with him at the same time. But it was in Minneapolis, and he'd already written The Courage to Teach. And that was one of the books I actually devoured when I began learning about adult learning and teaching. And since then, I've read many of his books, and the latest ones I've read are Let Your Life Speak and A Hidden Wholeness, which I've talked about here a little bit. The Hidden Wholeness, he just wrote On the Brink of Everything. He's got a podcast. He works with Carrie Newcomer. He's both a teacher and an activist, and one of my favorite authors. He's now 86 years, still producing books and podcasts. And then I discovered Thomas Kelly, and you are familiar with Thomas Kelly. That's who Irene was referring to tonight, and his Testament of Devotion, just a few years ago. And he wrote about a person named John Woolman. And John Woolman is a man that one person described as the quietest rebel in history. And I had to track down the Journal of John Woolman when I read about it in Thomas Kelly's book, and it's called The Journal of John Woolman and a Plea for the Poor. It's his spiritual autobiography. And this book is so used And I bought it used. It's so used that the cover came off of it and I had to glue it together today. That's how much I care about this book. But the thing about John Woolman, which is very, very interesting, he's Quaker. He was on his way to becoming a very wealthy man in the retail business. He was a tailor and he was producing goods. And all of a sudden, one day, he felt a, quote, stop in his mind. And he asked himself if did not truth required him to live a life more free from outward cumbers. So instead of pursuing money, which he was very good at, he withdrew wholly from his profitable retail trade to better attend to his inward business. The true business, he says, of his life. And that inward business meant that he was, another person writing about him said, was in the strongest possible position to take up the cause of the economically disadvantaged wherever he found them. So John Woolman, economically successful, stood back from his busy life, and he took advantage of that time to care for the economically disadvantaged. And what he's most known for is his opposition to slavery, which in the mid-1700s was hardly a blip on the screen of people in those days. People weren't even talking about it. But instead, through his work, because he pulled back from material wealth getting and spent time more on his inner self, instead, through his work, one person wrote, and think about this, more than any other single influence, it was Woolman's clear and steady voice that woke the conscience of Quakers, and ultimately through them of the Western world, to the moral evil of slavery. So what is most appealing to me about the Quakers is their commitment to both contemplation and action. Thomas Kelly, Testament of Devotion, wrote most powerfully in his other book, The Eternal Promise, the straightest road to social gospel runs through profound mystical experience. That's why we're here. Direct experience of God in community. The paradox of true mysticism, he says, that individual experience leads to social passion. If we seek a social gospel, he says, we much find it most deeply rooted in the mystic way. And here's the quote, love of God and love of neighbor are not two commandments, but one. Love of God and love of neighbor are two commandments, are one commandment, not two. They're one. It's the highest experience of the mystic. The birth of true mysticism brings with it the birthday of the wildest social gospel. So very quickly in summary, some of the foundations of Quakerism, which I love so much. George Fox was the movement's founder. He had a long time of his own soul searching. And he said, there is one, he found that if there is one, even Christ Jesus, that can speak to my condition. And from the very first, Quakers have been involved in social movements. They have silence as a spiritual practice. Their worship is marked by silence in gatherings, social gatherings at meeting houses where they sit for, like I said, up to an hour. It used to be 4 hours, I read, then 2 hours, and now it's down to 1 hour, without clergy. Sorry, Irene, or liturgy, and they wait together in expectant silence, waiting to be moved. And if they are moved, then they say something in the meeting itself. Anyone may lead if spoken. Key to them, their life is the inner life and constant revelation. They believe that God is constantly revealing himself or herself, itself, themselves to all of us all the time. The inner light, which I love that. The inner light is not merely comforting, it unsettles and calls people into costly faithfulness. One key part of Quakerism is their call for social witness, as I mentioned. And here are some of the areas which they've been active in for many, many years. Peace and nonviolence. Excuse me. Got it here. Peace and nonviolence. Opposition to slavery, well before the world started to turn to that. and racial injustice, equality of persons, including women's ministry and leadership, integrity and truthfulness in speech and action, prison reform, humane treatment, care for the poor, the vulnerable, and the displaced. Doesn't that sound like following Jesus to me? It does, completely. I spoke of moving stillness last week. This is the essence of moving stillness, contemplation and action together. If we are deeply listening, as the Quakers, we must be quiet enough to hear what is being asked of me now if I truly listen.